Well, hello everyone. Hello. How are you enjoying the conference? Is it good? Well, that's unanimous yes. So let's continue with the last talk of the iOS platform today. And my name is Jan. I'm the iOS platform lead at STRV. We're an agency in Prague, and we do all sorts of applications for startups from Silicon Valley, etc. Now would be the time to say the obligatory we're hiring, but everyone is hiring, so I'm not going to mention that. But let's not talk about me. Let's talk about something amazing, about something exciting, about something groundbreaking. Let's talk about something revolutionary. Let's not talk about that. Let's talk about SwiftUI, of course. SwiftUI was released at WWDC 2019. And it promises better apps, writing less code. I took this from the official page of SwiftUI, and Apple says that it's innovative, exceptionally simple. You have just one set of tools and APIs to build your UIs. And you can use declarative syntax, as you have heard in one of the talks that was before this one today. And most of all, it works across all the Apple platforms. And that's where the name of the talk that I'm presenting today comes from. The name of the talk is One App to Rule Them All. And what I wanted to find out is whether you can actually use SwiftUI on all the platforms and try to build an app that runs everywhere, on all the Apple devices, on iOS, on iPhones, on iPadOS, on iPads, on tvOS, on Apple TV, on watchOS, on Apple Watch, and, of course, on macOS, on the Mac. And yeah, it seems it's true. I'm going to spoil it for you, and it's quite possible. And look at this simple piece of code. With just a couple of lines of code, I can create this beautiful card with an image and a text. And you can see even from this simple piece of code that SwiftUI really delivers. Well, the rest of the talk will be about how it delivers over multiple platforms, of course. So let me introduce the app that I am building and that I'll be presenting in this talk today. So the idea is this. My wife is Albanian, and when I started dating her, I wanted to learn some Albanian as well. To kind of know the background, where she comes from, etc., etc., etc. So I found one of the 3 teachers of Albanian language in Czech Republic, where I live, and I started attending lessons. Now, of course, this was super old-fashioned, so I only had like written notes in my notebook, but no kind of a Duolingo way of learning these words. And I wished I had an app like this. The ones that were in the App Store, were just not cutting it for me. But at the time, I didn't have time, so I ditched the idea. But now, since we have SwiftUI and I want to try to build an actual app, this came back. So what I did is what most of the developers did after WWDC. I watched the videos about SwiftUI that were released right after WWDC from the workshops, and with this knowledge, with this like 4 hours of knowledge about SwiftUI, I sat on and built this in about 5 hours. And I was quite happy about that. Now, I showed this to my colleagues at work, and their reaction was, meh. And understandably so. This app is boring. Like, look at this. It looks like an Android app. So yeah, one of the colleagues told me, you know nothing. This doesn't look anything like an app that we would write for a client. And he was right. So what I did is that I went to the part of the office where the designers live, and I said, hey. And they said, hey. And I asked for someone who could help me build a design for this application. Now, Aleš, the head of our designer, said, hey, Roman has time. And so I was like, hey, Roman, we have this new amazing technology that is still very beta, but it's still very cool. And I would like you to build an application for me so that I could build a design for me so that I could implement it and see whether this new awesome SwiftUI technology works. He was like, okay. I asked him, hey, Roman, and it's very simple. I've heard that designers can use it. Could you write the UI for me? He was like, no. And so he didn't write it for me. But after going radio silent for about 7 days, Roman delivered. Roman delivered this beautiful design that when I saw it, I was like, yeah, okay, this doesn't look that simple, but I can probably do it. Like there's a table view or something, and some kind of animation up top, and a button. Yeah, I can probably do it. But he was like, well, I think this would work on iPads as well. So I made an iPad design for you. I was like, okay, thank you. That makes it more complicated, but yeah, size classes, I know this stuff, so I can do this. And he was like, yeah, I was bored, and I also made a Make app. At that time, I cried a little, but still. I was like, okay, thank you. And then he was like, yeah, and since it's easy for us, I just did a tvOS as well. I was like, I have a presentation in a month. You know that. It was like, yeah, that's why I didn't do watchOS. And so, at this time, I started contemplating my life choices, and I thought about opening the bakery that I always wanted. But after some time, I decided to actually build the app. Well, this screen, at least for this presentation, at least, because we don't have enough time for the whole app, of course, and of course it's not done yet. Just a disclosure, I have been building this since the beta 3, which was terrible. Only recently has the final version been released, and it actually started working quite nicely. But yeah, some stuff might not be top-notch based on the very recent version, but, well, whatever. So, at first, what I thought that I would do is I would write this SwiftUI code, and then by some magical features of Xcode, it would run everywhere. So you just write the code once, just write the iOS app, and something magical would happen, and it would run on macOS and tvOS. So when I started building the app, I started with something very simple. So take a look at this iPad screenshot. It has a list to the left and a detail view to the right. The code for this is super simple. It has a simple content view here, a struct and a body with some view, and you already know what it means based on the talk that was presented earlier today. But there's also this navigation view, which can take 2 items. The first one is the left item in our case, and the second one is the right item in our case. Very simple. SwiftUI delivers. Now, this is nice, works perfectly on iPad, but I wanted to have an app that runs on all the platforms. So, of course, I started with a Mac. Now, if you watch WWDC and some of the videos, and the previous talk that was here today, you probably know about this magical checkbox. So you can go and in your iOS app, click on this, and it automatically runs everything on a Mac. Perfect. We have a Mac app with a list and a detail view. Now, this is great if you don't want to do anything Mac-y in it. So, for example, I know that the Mac apps should have the translucent sidebar, where you could see like your desktop underneath. It's even in the designs that I showed you. And there's a sidebar list style for that in SwiftUI. But it is not available in iOS, and it shouldn't be, because it doesn't make any sense. So this wasn't a great way to do this. Maybe you could hack around it somehow. I don't know why. I don't know how. But then you would have your code full of ifs, and it would suck. So what I did is I created a new target, a Mac-specific target, and finally everything worked. So I had this list that was translucent, even with the hide button up there, because it's a sidebar. And then everything kind of looked more Mac-y than before. So I was quite happy with that. And that was it. Or was it? Take a look at these applications, again, at these screenshots that I showed you. These user interfaces look similar, but they're fundamentally different. The UI UX of a Mac app is fundamentally different from the UI UX of an iPad app, or a tvOS app, or an iOS iPhone app. So the gist is, UI should be different across all the platforms. Even if you take your application and just make it Mac-y just by clicking the button, it's probably going to work and compile, but it's still not going to be a great Mac app. So you should think about these apps separately. And then I finally understood one of the slides that were in one of the SwiftUI presentations by Apple from one of the workshops. They said, you don't write once and run everywhere. You don't do that. You learn once and apply everywhere. And that makes sense. SwiftUI and Xcode and the whole ecosystem gives us a couple of ways of doing multi-platforms SwiftUI apps. Firstly, it's the targets that I mentioned. So you could use them for the platform-specific code and the platform UI differentiation. And of course, you have size classes. Those still exist. Those still exist in iOS and iPadOS. So you can use them. So the question is, should you write everything from scratch? You're building 5 apps. Should you write everything from scratch? And the answer is yes, but no, but yes, but not really. You can share code between your apps, of course. The SwiftUI views are, as you know, composable, so you can compose them together. They're parameterizable very easily, so you can pass parameters to them and change their appearance or behavior. You have some styling capabilities that are built into SwiftUI, like the styling of buttons or styling of lists. And you have a lot more things. For example, the controls that you use, like the buttons or text fields, are adapting based on what platform they are running on. You have custom modifiers that you can create and use everywhere. You can share assets. You can share images and colors across all of your apps. And this all you can do because you're using just one technology to write your UI. You're using SwiftUI everywhere. There's no more app kit, no more UI kit, no more of that. It's just SwiftUI everywhere, so code can be easily shared. So let's take a look at these techniques that you can use. First is the composition and parameterization. So here's a simple example of what you can do in SwiftUI. So take a look at the bottom part. There's this content view, that is this whole screen, and you have a VStack where there's another component that I have created, the header view, that is up on top, and a list. So you can prepare your components and then share them at will. You can also add parameters. So for example, this astonished emoji view has a property called color. And based on the color, the emoji will be colored, of course. So you could use this in many different scenarios. You could pass different colors in different apps, and it would color itself properly while still using one code base. Well, I appreciate how simple it is to do something like this. A circle is still a view. No more switching context, nothing. It's beautiful. Then, there is a nifty technique that was shown by Apple in one of their talks, which is kind of a factory for a view. So imagine you have a list. The list shows a list of things, but it might have some additional functionality like sorting or filtering or something like that. Now, you probably don't want to duplicate this all over the apps because it's something that will probably be the same. The word list that I have in my application is in different UI variants, in different appearances, exactly the same across all the platforms. Even on Apple Watch, there's a list of words. So if I add filtering, I want to add it only once. And so what you can do is, you can have this list and reuse it across all the platforms just by providing a different view for the cell, quote unquote, because we don't have cells anymore, but for the view that is one of the items of the list. So this is very handy. And you can create your custom modifiers. So for example, here I have again a content view. This content view is containing one text item, which is Dogo. I set some frame on it, some width and height, and I apply my custom modifier that actually wraps quite a substantial amount of functionality, and it actually makes everything look like a cute dog picture with a rounded shape. So that's pretty cool. And you can use this across all the platforms again, because you're basically writing SwiftUI everywhere. Now we have adaptive controls. So based on what platform your code is running currently, the UI and the controls will look different. For example, here I have a text field, I have a toggle, I have a button. If you look at these three, they will look like this on iOS, but they will look like this on macOS. And they will look like this on Apple TV. So Apple has done a lot of work for you, and unless your designers go totally wild, as Roman did, you can use this. If they go wild, as Roman did, you cannot. Then you have list style, for example. So imagine in one of the first slides I showed you that I used the sidebar list style. Well, there's more. And you can have different context for your lists on different platforms or even different screens. So apart from the sidebar list style, there's also grouped list style and the plain one. So the grouped one is the one on the right, and it groups the items neatly within sections. So you can use this as well. You can use these sections, of course, in the sidebar list style too. Then you can do button styles. So if you have buttons that look the same across all the platforms, you can just wrap them in a button style like this and just reuse them everywhere. So for example, here I have just a simple button that prints SwiftUI rocks and has some text on it. I apply my style to it, and automatically these 6 or 7 lines of styling get run, and they create this beautiful pile-like button that might be the same across all the applications on all the platforms. And of course, you can share assets. So you can have your lovely color extension like this, and you can prepare all the coloring and everything for all the apps so that they're consistent. This is a good practice, and I think this is a kind of a naive way of doing the style system that was presented yesterday in one of the talks. But yeah, it works quite nicely. For a one-man job, good. Or you can even go a little further, and if you have gradients, because our designers go wild in the apps, you can just define them as well and share them everywhere. It's fine, because you're using SwiftUI everywhere. The linear gradient and the gradient structs, they exist everywhere. Beautiful. Now, how can we share the code in the case of the application that I just showed you? How can this be done? Well, if you look at this screen, this thing is the same on all the platforms. This thing is also the same on all the platforms. This button as well. This list, yep, the same. If we look at the iPad version, again, this is the same. This is the same. This button is still the same. It looks the same. It's just organized differently. The list is still there. And this button is used in 3 variants of the app. When you look at the Mac app, this thing is the same. This button is still the same. This list is still the same. And this button is again in almost all of the variants of the app. If you look at the tvOS, again, this thing is the same. This thing is the same. This button is the same. The list is the same. And this button is still the same. So as you can see, on all the platforms, because it's still one app, and it still does the same thing on all the platforms, you will have elements that will look similar, or maybe even exactly the same. And these are all the places where you can share the code among all the platforms without worrying. This was hardly possible before, and SwiftUI just enables this super easily. So let me show you the apps, or the screens. So I go to my Xcode, and I open this lovely project. Can everyone see the code? I hope so. If you can't see the code, shout I. Good. No shouting. Okay, so let me run the iOS target. And this is the beautiful animating SwiftUI app. And by this, I want to show you, I want to tell you that a SwiftUI is actually, in my opinion, production ready. Like if I can build this, I can build pretty much everything. Let me run the iPad version. This will take a second. And it will run. And here's my iPad version. Again, animating nicely. The layout is slightly different, but still, I'm sharing the same items. If I run this application on the iPhone, I can already tell you that the circular view is the same. I'm using the same code for it. The list items, the words, are the same. Those are the same view. The add word button, still the same view. So this is how you share code. But we can go further. Let me run this on Apple TV within my specific target. And yeah, again, using the same pieces of code, I have an app that is a tvOS app, even with this beautiful way of doing focusing. It works quite nicely. It has a specific target because I needed to use some platform-specific code here, but still, a lot of the code is shared. The tiny thing that I have not figured out yet is that once you style a button in tvOS, in SwiftUI, it stops sending the action. It stops triggering the action. So the buttons don't do anything. But that's fine. But we can go further. I can run my Mac target. And voila, a Mac app appears. Still sharing the same code. The circular view is the same. The add word view is the same. The cards are the same. But they also behave quite nicely when you hover over them, which you can't do on iOS, because SwiftUI makes it really easy to reuse pieces of the UI and then adapt them to the platform. So maybe apply some additional modifiers on them or add some functionality while still using the definition of the UI that we have prepared and we are sharing everywhere. Look at this. Isn't this cool? I think it's cool. But we can go further, of course, and we can do a watchOS app. Now, I didn't have any designs for that, so of course, the UI is very plain, but it works. We have a watchOS app with a table view or a list in my Apple Watch, and it works nicely. And the best thing about this is, look at the amount of code that I had to write for this. So we have this content view, which is basically just a line of code here. And this is it. This is it. This is the app. This is the screen. It's just 5 lines of code while sharing stuff from the other applications as well. So let's take a look at how can we actually share the code in the code itself. So I'm going to go to my iOS target here, and I'm going to open this content view. And I have conveniently kind of commented out bits and pieces. So if I comment this out, this will complain horribly. So I will comment this, and I will run the app for iOS after I kill all the variants. Hey, I have 5 apps. Come on, this is cool. This was impossible before. Okay, so here we are. iPhone 11. Let's go. This will reload in a moment. Please reload faster. Take a look at this. This is the piece that I'm sharing across all the platforms. But you might have noticed that sometimes the gradient that shows the progress, the green one, is sometimes white on other platforms. And the sizing is somewhat different, and the margins are somewhat different. So how can we do this? Well, quite easily. Look at this. Here, I'm basically doing a shared progress view that I have prepared for all the platforms. And the only thing I'm doing is passing a couple of parameters into it and a frame. Now, if you look, also please excuse these. Those are just the mock data. If you look at the shared progress view, it is a view that has quite a few parameters that are needed, like the width of the circle that shows the progress, or the diameter, or the font that I'm going to use for the progress percentage, or the style of the stroke, whether it should be just a plain color or whether it should be a gradient. So things like these. And look at this. Look at this. I know this is not an introduction to SwiftUI talk, but look at this. This is the thing that is shown on the screen. Just on these couple of lines, one Z-stack, one circle, one arc, which is a little more complicated, and one circle view, which shows the percentage. It's very simple. I can do this. And with the magic use of with animation, I can just animate it as well. SwiftUI is pretty cool. So what else can we do? Well, we can go a little further and take a look at how we use this on the Mac app. So if I go here and I look at the sidebar of my Mac app to the left, and I open the header view, here you can see that I'm still using the same view as it is, just setting a different frame on it. It's 100 right now instead of 200. I'm sharing the code. I'm not writing it twice. It runs on all the platforms. It's beautiful. So this is kind of a nice example of what you can do. But the UIs for this particular screen are very different on all the platforms. So there's a sidebar on a Mac. There's a size class applied on iOS, so that there's buttons on iPads and one button on iOS. It looks kind of similar to iPad on tvOS, but there's this hovering and focusing of the elements, and the list has sometimes 3 columns and sometimes just 1. Now, this is the hard screen, but there are screens that are kind of easy to do because they will look exactly the same on all the platforms. So in my application, I have a screen that is basically supposed to be a game that lets you compose your word that you're trying to learn from just a couple of letters that this word contains. Oh, I can't type. Let's do this like this. So if you take a look at this screen right now, it's just a simple array of buttons, let's say, or a stack of buttons. And when I start pressing them, if I remember how to say this in French, it works. It says bonjour, it says correct. Now again, this view itself is something that I really don't want to replicate or duplicate on all the platforms. This is the same. The game will be on Mac, it will be on Apple TV, it will be on iOS, it will be on iPads as well. And I really don't want to have 5 screens with duplicated code. But not even the UI, because I want this to look the same on all the platforms. And if I go to my Mac target into Content View, and I take this game typing view again, and uncomment it, and run it on macOS, it works. Some types of screens can work almost exactly on all the platforms, and then you're done. You can just reuse them, and you're done with it, and you have one screen shared across 4 platforms without almost any work. So I'm just going to mess this up. And it's not correct, of course. We have time? We have a little bit of time. So if we look at this typing view, it is, again, a view that wraps my shared view. And I'm using a couple of techniques that I showed you before on the slides. So I'm sending some parameters into the initializer, of course, some height, some spacing. And I'm also providing 3 factories. Now, most of these on most of the platforms use shared items for the buttons because they look the same. But for example, on tvOS, it looks slightly different. So I need to use these factories to kind of provide the specific view, the specific appearance that I want for that particular platform. And yeah, that's how you do it, basically. Now, the purpose of this presentation is one thing only. What I wanted to show is that you can reuse a lot of functionality, a lot of views across all the platforms. You can use multiple techniques to have UIs that look the same, but also similar on all the platforms. And above all, I think that SwiftUI is production ready, except of minor quirks like buttons not working on tvOS if you style them. It works. And you can start writing your SwiftUI apps right now, and it will work. Only on iOS 13, though, which sucks. But well, and that's it. Thank you.